This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 102 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you've tuned into the podcast. If this is your first time listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Glad you found us. Glad you're listening in. And if you're coming back for more, I'm just so glad you're with me on this journey and that you hopefully have subscribed to the podcast and have become a faithful listener. I love getting comments from people and feedback, as I always say, and I really want this to be a helpful resource for you in your journey. As I'm recording this, recording it a little bit, the intro, my process is I interview people, and then right before we get ready to produce the podcast, I'll do the intro and outro and all that kind of stuff and send it all over to my virtual assistant, Rachel, and she puts it all together for us. But, here it is mid-October, and it's finally, feels like fall. Fall is my favorite time of year, and I'm really pumped right now because I'm getting ready to leave, or at least start my journey to Colorado tomorrow to go out to Killing It Camp, to the which is really a conference for private practice owners and those interested in really taking their practices to the next level. And I'm really looking forward to meeting a lot of new people and just really connecting with people out there when I get there. I'm also going to be doing some recording of the podcast. So a lot of great future guests to look forward to. I've already been in touch with some of them, and I'm looking forward to you hearing from them and learning from them. And the guests that I'll be having will be some of the other speakers at the conference. I think I shared earlier that was invited to be a speaker at Killing It Camp, and I'm going to be talking about using Google G Suite, which you've heard from me before. I put together a course called G Suite for Therapists, and it's out there. And if you go to practiceoftherapy.com/G Suite course, you can get access to that. And the thing about it is I'm getting ready to do some pretty significant updates to the course. And once I get the updates in place, I'm going to go up on the price of the course. So take advantage of getting the course now. And with all of my courses, the G Suite for Therapists course and the Money Matters for Private Practice course, one of the things to know about the courses that I currently have available is once you enroll, you've got essentially lifetime enrollment. And so as there are updates that are added to the courses and things that change along the way, for obviously Google G Suite changes as Google does changes to it. I periodically go in there and update the course, but once you purchase the course, you have a lifetime of access to it, and plus the updates. So anyway, as I mentioned, I'm going to be going up on the price of the course just because it's time to do that. Just like in our practices, we need to go up on our fees every now and then. I'm going to be going up on the price of that. So take advantage of that now and get it at the current price. It's just $98, and there's also a payment plan if you need to budget a little bit for that. But you can go check that out at practiceoftherapy.com/G Suite course. And in that course, I just teach you about how to use the different tools of Google G Suite, plus make them HIPAA secure. So, and that's a big part of what I'm going to be talking about at the Killing It Camp conference, is just showing people how to use some of those different tools that are available, about HIPAA security with G Suite, and also just some hacks around how you can make kind of automate things within your practice using those tools. I depend on Google G Suite every single day. Number one, for the email. One of the things about using Google G Suite, if you use the paid version of it, and you really need to use the paid version of it to get the HIPAA security, is that you can use your own URL for your email. A regular Gmail account is your name at gmail.com. But when you get the paid version, you can switch that over so that you can use the URL for your practice website. So, for example, when you get an email from me, Gordon at practiceoftherapy.com, that's through Gmail, and that's set up through Google G Suite. Also, for my practice email, I do the same. It's my name plus at kingsportcounseling.com. So a lot of people aren't aware of that. And so that's one of the things I teach in that course about setting all that up. So anyway, just wanted to let you know about that and take advantage of that. And I'm also, you're going to be hearing from me this next week. I might even be jumping on and doing some Facebook Lives while I'm out there just to check in with folks. So keep an eye out for that. I'm really excited for you to meet our guest for today, Sarah Leitschuh. And Sarah is a therapist, a marriage and family, another MFT person, just like me, up in Minnesota. And Sarah has put her shoe into the consulting realm and really trying to help, and I think it comes out of doing so. One of the things about that I've really kind of learned about other people that go into consulting with other private practice owners is that it comes out of a place of really having a really strong desire to help other people succeed. I know when I do supervision, just clinical supervision with folks, a lot of times we kind of delve over into just how to run a practice, particularly those that are in private practice. And so there's a lot of overlap sometimes between the clinical side and the business side. But anyway, Sarah has really carved out a great niche for herself. And in this particular episode, we spend time just talking about how to beat the overwhelm in private practice, because a lot of times it can be overwhelming. So without further ado, here's my guest, Sarah Leitschuh. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And I'm so happy to have as my guest today Sarah Leitschuh, who is up in Eagan, Minnesota. And as we were talking about, it's a little bit colder there than it is here in the sunny South. But welcome, Sarah. I'm glad you're here with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you too, Gordon.
Yes. We were commenting that we both think each other has an accent, but I don't think I do, but Sarah does, and I think she does, and so we'll just leave it at that. But it's fun. It's always funny, Sarah, when people come on the podcast. A lot of times people will make that comment, "Oh, I love your accent," and I thought, well, I don't have an accent. You do.
Totally me.
Yeah. So that's it. It's just funny, but I love it. So, Sarah, as I start out with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit about your private practice journey and how you've ended up where you've ended, and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. Well, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist up here in Minnesota, like you said. And it's interesting because as we're sitting to record this today, it's the middle of October, and it's actually the 10-year anniversary of me becoming fully licensed therapist this week. Yes. Yeah. Which feels like a huge milestone. Mm-hmm. More than a decade, right? If you think about all of the pre-licensed hours. But I started in a nonprofit agency, and I did all of my practicum experience in the very beginning part of my licensure hours and post-license hours at a nonprofit agency here, and also started to do supervision at that practice too. And we were working with a lot of clients with extensive trauma histories, a lot of families that were involved in systems, child protection, juvenile probation, that type of thing. And I worked there for quite a long time, probably 8-ish years, and made the transition to private practice after the birth of my second son, or my second child. First is a daughter. I went back to the agency part-time after my daughter was born, but I just knew that I wasn't going to keep doing agency work. The amount of hours that I needed to work there to pay for childcare just didn't make sense. So I decided I was going to take the leap into private practice after my son was born. And very part-time private practice, because I mostly wanted to be home with my kids, and that's what really worked the best for my family. But I didn't want to lose all the clinical skills that I had, and I wanted to keep doing supervision. I had worked so hard to add that to my clinical skills. So I started just one day a week in private practice, and then over the course of 5 years, added more and more days until this point in time where I'm now working full-time, part-time with my therapy practice, and then part-time with the Vibrant Therapist Consulting, which is my coaching practice.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And what's interesting is that sounds almost identical to kind of my journey as well. I started working for a nonprofit agency, same population, at-risk children and youth, and did intensive in-home therapy, and then went through the supervisor training, approved supervisor training to be AEMFT approved supervisor and all that, and then when my daughter got into high school is when I decided, okay, I need time to go on band trips and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So yeah, and I think that's a pretty common thing for most people that go into private practices. As much as anything, we want the flexibility of being able to take time off and to be able to do stuff with our families, because I'm guessing, as you know, working for an agency is more than a 40-hour work a week.
Yeah. Right. And the intensity of the caseload and the number of clients that I was expected to see there. I think early in my career, I could manage that in a different way than I can now, right? Like my emotional energy just isn't there for 30 plus clients a week.
Right. And that was same thing I figured out. Of course, when I moved into more consulting within that agency, clinical consulting, it was not really any easier. It was just a different kind of workload, just reviewing treatment plans and all that kind of stuff. Just really, it takes its toll. And it's, and I'm glad we've got people that work in that still do that, because it's very much needed. Yeah. So you made the transition into private practice, and what have you, and I know one of the things that you've been able to do is really, which I think is a natural progression for those of us that have gone through the supervisor training, is really helping people with not only the clinical side of things, but the business side of things, and really doing some consulting in that front. So how'd you make that transition?
Absolutely. Well, I think, a little bit earlier, Gordon, you alluded to that we all kind of go into private practice because we long for that flexibility that comes with private practice. And I think that was definitely part of what drew me into private practice. But I kind of quickly realized that flexibility, if it's not a structured type of flexibility, can be a bad thing. And I found myself really overwhelmed in the earliest parts of my private practice, because I was trying to essentially juggle being a full-time stay-at-home mom and build a thriving practice, right? And I'm one of those people that sets goals and wants to achieve them. And it was hard for me to feel like I didn't have enough time and energy for everything that I wanted to do. And I started to feel really frustrated. I was feeling like I was working all the time, but not really seeing the results. I was exhausted and depleted. And at that time, I was doing supervision in my practice also, and I was hearing similar things come up from my supervisees, that it just felt like they were going all the time and not really living the vision that they had really had when they got into this field. Yeah. So I started to realize it has to be something we could do differently, right? There has to be a way to run a private practice, show up how you want to show up in your practice, but still have a lot left over for how you want to show up in your life outside of practice, whether that's in terms of your relationship to yourself and investing in your own personal interests, but also in terms of investing in your personal relationships.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that is so true. And that again, it's even with my group practice, we have a lot of flexibility in schedules and stuff, but yet I see some of my therapists that kind of struggle with feeling still overwhelmed by things. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the things that you're learning about really kind of easing that up for people in terms of that overwhelm and just, you know, yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
what are
Yep.
you learning and figuring
Yep.
out?
One of the things that I really like to help other therapists do, and is something that I regularly do myself, is what I call taking inventory. It's really getting a clear picture of what the state of your practice is right now. Because I think a lot of times we can find the path to doing things more easily, but we don't necessarily have that big picture of what's contributing to our overwhelm. So
Hmm.
when therapists are taking inventory, I ask them to think about things like, what is contributing to your overwhelm? Where do you feel stuck? Where do you feel like you're wasting a lot of time and energy and not seeing the results that you want to see? I also ask therapists to kind of look at where might they be leaking time, energy, and money, because I often find if we can start to plug some of those leaks, therapists end up finding that they have more time and energy to devote to things that are important to them, but also to catching up on areas of
Hmm.
backlog.
Right, right. And what's the way that you go about when you're working with therapists around that issue? What's the way that you kind of approach that?
Yep, I have a tool on my website that anyone can request, and it's called the Overwhelm Assessment for Stressed Out Therapists. And it's a
Okay.
nice checklist of common areas that we have in our practices, right? So it runs through different types of documentation, but it also runs through email inboxes, website, marketing types of things. And what I have people do is kind of look through that. Like, it's a comprehensive list, look through and mark the areas where they're feeling overwhelmed. And then we work from that. I encourage people to kind of go through one of two things: either to tackle the area of overwhelm that's easiest to take action on and see results
Hmm.
quickly, because if we can see results, that builds momentum and it gives us that energy to keep going.
Hmm.
Or to invest time in something that's going to be more time consuming, but it's going to have a huge, huge, huge impact on your practice, right? So if you're really behind in your session notes, let's say, that might be where you want to focus, even though it's going to take a while to get through that. But once you have that knocked out, you're just going to feel lighter.
Right, right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I I think is important to remember is that when we're feeling overwhelmed, and not only say this to my clients, but also the other therapists that I work with, is when we're feeling overwhelmed, the more we can break it down into smaller pieces
Yes.
is the only way that we can really tackle any of that.
Right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Baby steps are so important. And
right.
that's part of why I really encourage people to take inventory and get numbers on things, or make
Hmm.
what's overwhelming them measurable in some way. Because if we can see little bits of progress, we can keep going. But if we don't feel like we're getting anywhere, that just even adds more to that layer
Hmm.
of overwhelm.
Right, right. I totally agree. Yeah. So what have you noticed, or what are you figuring out about, or what are you seeing rather with what are the areas that people tend to get most overwhelmed with?
Um, That's an interesting question. Documentation seems to
Hmm.
be an area of overwhelm for quite a few therapists. But I think, and it kind of depends, sometimes it's documentation, sometimes it's feeling like their caseload is so full, but it's full of clients that they're not really passionate about working
Right.
with, or their schedule. Like, the schedule is something that comes up over and over again, in terms of, I'm not working a schedule that I want to work, but I feel like I can't give up whatever it is, evening slots, weekend slots, whatever, like whatever people have their mindset block around, like my schedule has to be this way. Or they fill their schedule with so many extra things outside of therapy just because they feel like that's going to help them build their practice, even though all those extras are maxing them out and making them really stressed.
Yeah. And I would add to that the not sticking to their schedule. In other words,
yes.
Those clients that come in and say, well, can't you see me at time? And they just kind of cave and give in. And then they end up, really, doing stuff they really don't want to do.
Right. Absolutely. I think that having solid boundaries is one of the key elements of reducing overwhelm as a therapist. And when I think about boundaries, I think about boundaries around how we're spending our time. And that's like the nitty and gritty of our schedule, but it's also what we're doing during our work time, as well as boundaries around client work, which clients we take into our practices, which clients we recognize might be a little bit too much for the private practice setting, and having a solid list of referrals to provide to clients if we can't take them. And some of those extra things that we take on because we think they're going to help our practice, but maybe don't actually end up helping our practice.
Right. Yeah. And I think, it's one thought I just had. I was listening to something on NPR this morning, and it was, there's been a lot of press lately just about mental health and mental health services, and particularly in some areas where it's really hard to get services. One of the things that I think is going to be just continues to be a trend is we're going to, because there is so much press and there's fortunately a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Just a lot of lip service or a lot of promotion of ending the stigma in mental health. I think we're going to start getting more and more people coming to us. I've always said that, that I don't think we ever have to worry about competition in the mental health field because there's more than enough to go around. But one of the things that I think, to your point, Sarah, is I think it's important to define for ourselves what types of clients we really want to work with, because what happens, and I've had this happen to me, is I start taking clients that are really not my ideal client and not really populations that I enjoy working with, or, even worse, is just not really qualified to work with. I mean, I'm not a drug and alcohol addiction specialist, and we get a lot of calls for that, but we just don't do that type of therapy. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that comes up a lot. I mean, it comes up for me personally, but also from my supervisees, this comes up a lot, and also in coaching with coaching clients. And what I always try to remind myself and the therapists that I talk to is we really want to get clients to the therapist who's the best fit for them. And they deserve to be with someone who's really passionate about working with them and has, like you said, the skill set to do that. And if I know that's not me, or my supervisees or my coaching clients know that's not them, it really is in the client's best interest to take that step of connecting them to the person who is a better fit versus taking them onto our caseload, because it's not serving us or the clients to do that, because we're going to get frustrated. We're going to feel resentful that we filled our spots with a client that's not our best fit, and then we're not going to show up as the best therapist for this client, even our best version that we could be for that client. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's that whole niche debate thing, that we hear a lot about, and just the importance of creating a niche for yourself and being able to really do your best work. Yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like time management, just documentation, taking on, not setting boundaries are really kind of the things that you notice are some of the top kind of overwhelm points. What are some of the others that come to mind for you around the people that you've been working with?
Absolutely. Well, I think that similar to kind of similar to what we've been talking about is I find that people tend to let go of their vision of why they came into private practice. And there's a lot of things that contribute to this. But when we do that, we end up saying yes to too many things when we should actually be saying no to some things that aren't actually in alignment with our vision for the practice that we wanted to create.
Right.
And I think, I think we compare ourselves to other therapists. I think we get triggered, like that fear of missing out gets triggered. So we end up like overcommitting ourselves. We end up trying to absorb way too much information, and we get that information overload where we can't actually take the right meaningful action that would help us create the practice that we dreamed of.
Right, right. And it's another thing that comes to mind for me is just maybe being, as our friend Joe Sanok says, being petrified by perfection, and that we have this myth that there's just a certain way you have to do things,
right?
But there are so many different ways to do your practice, and I think ultimately you have to do what works for you and what just feels right for you in your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you just said you have to do what works for you. That's what I always think about. Like when I think about the work I do with therapists, it's really about helping therapists find the way to do this work that we do as therapists in a way that works for them. And that is going to look different for all of us because our life circumstances are different. Our clinical training is different. Our ideal clients are different, right? And I think that if we can own what our vision is, how we want our practice to fit with our life outside of work, we're going to find an easier path to creating that practice versus trying to fit our practice into a cookie cutter mold of what we had an idea was the right way to do practice.
Right. Yeah, and it goes back to what people have heard from me a lot is really honing in on your why you're doing what you're doing.
Right.
And I totally agree. I think it's so important to kind of ground yourself in that and going back and taking a look at that often.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to say more about what you had said earlier, just about constantly evaluating and doing an assessment of your practice?
Absolutely. So I really recommend that periodically, at least quarterly, maybe even monthly, therapists do take a look at the state of their practice and what's going well, what's not going well, how am I getting closer to my vision? Am I taking actions that are getting me to create that vision, or am I taking actions that are pulling me away from the vision that I have?
Right. Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely right. It's interesting because one of the things that, in fact, last episode's guest, we were talking about Michelle, and I can't, her last name is slipping me right now, but she had developed a planner for just really kind of helping you stay focused on those things. And the planner that I'm using now, it's a Michael Hyatt planner, the full focus planner. And part of the process, and right before I got on this call with you, Sarah, was I was doing my weekly review. And so I went back and looked at what I had set aside as kind of accomplishments for this past week, and then really setting up some goals and some accomplishments for this week. And I think when we do those kinds of things, that helps us stay focused on our vision and our why and all of that. And it's a matter of just using our time in that way. It really doesn't take me that long.
No.
I mean, to do that each week. And it's just, just staying grounded with things.
Yeah, I teach that same strategy to all of my coaching clients and use it myself. I call it mapping out your areas of focus. And on Monday, like I really push it. It has to be Monday or Tuesday. Like at the beginning of the week, you really do have to set your priorities. And the second piece that I always add in is you have to map out on your schedule where you're going to focus.
Right.
those
Yeah.
priorities for the week.
When you're going to do it.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
otherwise it's Thursday and Friday and you're exhausted, right? And you're ready to go in the weekend and you find that you didn't do anything that was actually important to you that whole week.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I'm notorious for doing that, of just not getting specific enough about when I'm going to do things, and, putting it on the calendar is, that's when I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So, wow. Well, this is something that's, I think helping people kind of get through the overwhelm, I think, is just an important thing for us to think about all the time. What are some other things that come to mind for you, and just thinking about helping people with the overwhelm, in terms of, how would somebody just kind of know where to start with that? In terms of, okay, they're feeling overwhelmed, they may be behind on session notes, they're, they're booked solid, and they've got more than enough clients, and just all of that. What's kind of the starting place, do you think?
Absolutely. Two things come to mind for me as I was listening to you kind of describe that scenario, Gordon. First is to do a brain dump. I am a big fan of brain dumps. I am not a big fan of like the traditional to-do list, because I think it gets way too long. But when a therapist is overwhelmed, what I really encourage them to do is just get out a piece of paper, write everything that's on their mind, everything they think they should be doing, everything, like where they're feeling behind, just get it all on that paper. And I think that's helpful, because then we don't have to worry about forgetting anything. We're just going to get it out there. And then what I suggest is each week, you should really only have one or two areas of focus, in addition to, right? Like, we're all busy, right? We all have clients. We have to keep up with our documentation, just the basics of running our practice. So adding more than one or two additional things is too much, and you're not going to see results. So from that brain dump, I want you to choose just one or two things that you're going to focus on this week. And like I said, maybe it's going to be most helpful to you to just choose the two things that you can knock out and feel confident about. And then the next week, you're going to choose something that's a little bit more intense, right?
Right.
And that just helps get the momentum going. But on the other hand, if you just know there's something that's weighing you down, that you just can't even get anything done because you're so distracted by feelings of guilt for that project or that task, you might want to start there. And you want to just start with a baby step, right? Like, if you have a whole list of notes you need to do, focus on getting 5 extra notes done this week, right? Like, set it as a manageable goal, but slowly kind of tick through that.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's great advice. I know, I think of it, the metaphor that comes to mind for me, and when I'm teaching this same kind of thing to people, I think about having a way to capture everything, which that's what the brain dump does. And I know for me, kind of the measure for me was when I'm feeling overwhelmed, that I try to always remember to, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed by several things. Let me just write everything down.
Yes, right.
Just capture it all. And it's kind of like, I have this visual image of just having this big box in my office and just throwing everything in the box. And then I sort through that box one piece at a time, and then make a decision about what to do about each thing.
Right. Yes.
So
right.
I think that's really helpful.
Right.
And it's as therapists, we know that works, because that's what we do with,
that's what you
our
teach
clients.
Your clients, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
Containment, yes.
And I think sometimes it's so hard to apply it to ourselves. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Related to that idea too, Gordon, is I'm really big on intentionally tabling things for later, because I think we get so wrapped up in all the things that we can do, and literally we do not have time for all the things that we want to do oftentimes. So I find it's really helpful for myself and the coaching clients I work with to intentionally table things. So it's, now we're at the end of getting towards the end of 2019, right? Like, so some of the things on your brain dump list are just not going to be able to happen this year. So writing those on a list for 2020 frees up some energy to focus on what you actually can get done this
Mm-hmm.
year, and you know you're going to come back to those other things in 2020, but it's not just hanging over your head right now.
Right, right. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the other thing too that I'm figuring out, and it might be because of my age as much as anything, but I think just to physically write it out rather than do it electronically slows us down enough. And there's something about writing something out that I think causes us to retain it better.
Oh yeah, I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah, I
too.
think it's the right brain, left brain talking to each other kind of thing. So,
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of writing stuff out too.
Right. Right.
The last thing about the scenario that you described, Gordon, you were talking about someone feels like their schedule is filled to the max, right? There's no time to work on the things that are overwhelming them. This is probably one of the number one things that comes up, lack of time. And what I really encourage people to do is start blocking off time, right? Even if like you look at this week and there's not a single space on your schedule that you could block off to work on something that's overwhelming you, go to the next week. Keep going forward until you find a blank spot and block it off, and then you hold the boundaries around that time as sacred, right? Like your overwhelm is something that you do need to work on, right? Like prioritizing your own well-being is just as important as seeing a client, in my opinion. So even if it doesn't feel like it can happen for a couple of weeks, I want you to go ahead and look at your schedule and block off the time to work on these tasks that are contributing to your overwhelm.
And I would add to that is block it off at a time when your energy level is going to be the highest to work on those things, because if your energy level is low, we tend to procrastinate and put it off.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely pay attention to your energy when you're at your best A game.
Wow.
And if, no matter what, you cannot find time, that's probably a warning sign to you that you need to say no to something, outsource a task, ask someone for help. We have to figure out how to make time for you to get these things that are contributing to your overwhelm under control.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Sarah, I know we could talk forever on this topic. I mean, it's something I'm passionate about as well. It's just, as I say, I'm not a naturally organized person, so I have to work at it. And I know that what I've been able to teach myself just around time management, productivity, and just, the overwhelm that it will happen. I mean, it just does, is something I'm passionate about as well. But I want to be mindful of your time and tell folks about how they can get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing.
Absolutely. People can find me at my website, which is saraleitschuh.com. And I know that's going to be impossible to figure out how to spell. So Gordon will, of course, include a link to that site. And I hang out on Facebook quite a lot. I have a Facebook page for the Vibrant Therapist Consulting, as well as a Facebook community called the Vibrant Therapist Community. I look forward to connecting with people there.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. We'll have links to all of this in the show summary, show notes. So, well, Sarah, it's been so great to connect with you and get to know you better. And I hopefully we can do more of this in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed hearing from Sarah. And as you can tell, she's another kind of like-minded person when it comes to just thinking about how we beat the overwhelm at those times when we do get overwhelmed in our practices or just in life in general. And it happens. I mean, it's just, I can think over several times this last year with just all the stuff that's been going on for me personally, where I've just felt overwhelmed. And I think breaking things down into smaller pieces is always a helpful thing, but also drawing on the support of others and really looking at ways to do that and just be more productive with our time and being able to just focus on what matters most. I think that's, it's an ongoing theme of, like we said in the interview, just understanding your why and staying grounded with those kinds of things are just I think it's how you survive in this world of private practice. So again, folks, thanks again for listening to the podcast. Do check out today's sponsor for the podcast, TherapyNotes, and you can get to them at TherapyNotes.com. And if you use the coupon code Gordon, you can get your first 2 months free of their services. They are just really an outstanding electronic health record system. Like I said, they're who I use in my practice, and it's really kind of the hub of my practice in terms of the work I do with clients, but also the work I do with my colleagues here in my group practice. So go check them out. And do check out the G Suite for Therapists course. Take a look at that. I think it can be pretty helpful for you. The one thing about G Suite, which is nice, speaking of electronic health record systems, you can use it in conjunction with that. It doesn't the one doesn't replace the other, but they really kind of they augment each other, and they really help each other work well with each other. So again, I talk about some of that in the course. So you can get to that course at practiceoftherapy.com/G Suite course. So take care, folks. I hope you have a great rest of your week and weekend, and I look forward to talking with you and being in your ears and in your heads in the next episode. Take care, folks. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.